The notification sound from my phone cut through the quiet hum of the university library like a knife. I glanced at the screen, expecting another mundane update from a classmate or maybe a reminder about an upcoming exam. Instead, I saw my mother's name, and my heart did that little skip it always did when family reached out during my senior year at college. I was 3 months away from graduation, 3 months away from finally proving to everyone, especially to my stepfather Richard, that I wasn't the waste of space he'd called me throughout high school. My finger swiped across the screen, and the words that appeared made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's—" The message cut off abruptly, as if she'd been interrupted mid-sentence. I stared at the screen, reading it again and again, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. My hands trembled as I called her number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. The third time I heard 3 sharp beeps, the sound of a disconnected line. They'd blocked me. I sat in that library chair for what felt like hours, staring at those 17 words that had just shattered my entire world. Students moved around me, lost in their own academic pursuits, completely unaware that someone's life was imploding just 3 tables away from them. My name is Marcus Chen, and until that moment, I thought I understood my place in the world. My mother, Rebecca, had married Richard Hawthorne when I was 14, 2 years after my father died in a car accident. Richard brought his daughter, Emma, into our family, a girl my age who seemed to hate me from the moment we met. Still, I'd tried to make it work. I'd tried to be the good stepson, the responsible older brother, the son who would make his mother proud. For 4 years, I'd endured Richard's constant criticism, his comparisons between Emma and me, his not-so-subtle hints that I was a burden on their real family. When I'd gotten into Stanford on a partial academic scholarship, I thought things would finally change. I thought he'd finally see my worth. Instead, apparently, they'd waited until I was 3 months from graduation to kick me out of their lives entirely. The next few days passed in a blur of desperate phone calls and unanswered emails. I reached out to neighbors, family friends, even my high school guidance counselor, anyone who might have contact with my mother. The responses were all variations of the same theme. "We heard there was some kind of falling out," or "Your mother seemed very upset about something," or worst of all, "Maybe it's better to give them some space." Space. As if being abandoned by your only remaining parent was something that could be solved with a little breathing room. It wasn't until I managed to corner Mrs. Patterson, our elderly next-door neighbor, at the local grocery store during spring. Break that, I finally learned the truth. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, fidgeting with her purse strap and avoiding eye contact. "Marcus, honey," she said, her voice heavy with pity. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but they're saying you stole money from your stepfather's business account." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" $50,000, she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "Richard told everyone you'd been taking money for months to pay for drugs and gambling debts. Your mother, she was devastated, honey. She said she couldn't believe her own son would do such a thing." I stood there in the cereal aisle, surrounded by colorful boxes and promotional displays, feeling like the ground was dissolving beneath my feet. Drugs and gambling, $50,000. The accusations were so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. Richard hadn't just kicked me out of the house, he'd systematically destroyed my reputation, poisoned my mother against me, and crafted a narrative that painted me as a criminal and an addict. It was brilliant, really. Who would believe the word of an accused drug addict over that of a respected local businessman? I spent the next week digging, using every resource available to a computer science major with too much time and too much anger. What I found was a masterpiece of manipulation that had been years in the making. Richard's business, a mid-sized construction company, had been slowly bleeding money due to his poor management and extravagant spending. The $50,000 I'd supposedly stolen? It had been transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account that had been opened using my social security number and forged documents. Richard had been siphoning money from his own company for months, building a case against me while simultaneously covering his own tracks. But that wasn't even the worst part. Emma, my dear stepsister, had been documenting our family's finances for her college business class project. Her laptop contained screenshots of bank statements, photographs of financial documents, and most damning of all, a video she'd accidentally recorded of her father on a phone call with someone named Tony, discussing the best way to pin this on the boy and make sure Rebecca never doubts the story. The video was time-stamped 3 days before my mother's text message. They hadn't just abandoned me, they'd planned it, meticulously. Richard had manipulated my mother, destroyed my reputation, and stolen my identity to cover his own crimes. And Emma had known. She'd watched it happen and done nothing. I sat in my dorm room that night, staring at the evidence spread across my desk, feeling something I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just anger, it was a cold, calculating fury that seemed to burn without heat. They'd taken everything from me: my family, my home, my mother's love, and my identity. They'd left me with nothing, well, almost nothing. They'd forgotten that I was 3 months away from graduating with a degree in computer science and cybersecurity. They'd forgotten that I'd spent 4 years learning how to navigate digital systems, trace financial transactions, and understand the intricate ways that technology could be used to uncover or create truth. Most importantly, they'd forgotten that revenge is a dish best served with evidence, precision, and perfect timing. My plan took shape over the next several weeks, each component carefully crafted and tested. I wasn't going to simply expose Richard's fraud. That would be too easy, too quick. He'd stolen my identity to commit his crimes, so I would use that same identity theft to orchestrate his downfall. If he wanted to blame Marcus Chen for his problems, then Marcus Chen would give him problems worth blaming. First, I needed to reclaim control of the offshore account he'd opened in my name. This was surprisingly easy. The security questions had been answered using information about me that Richard had gathered over the years, and the recovery email was one I still had access to. Within 48 hours, I had full control of an account containing $127,000 of his company's money. But I didn't touch the money, not yet. Instead, I began a carefully orchestrated campaign of digital documentation. Using skills I'd learned in my cybersecurity courses and some techniques that existed in legal gray areas, I gained access to Richard's business email, his personal computer, and his phone records. What I found was a pattern of financial mismanagement that went back nearly 5 years: fraudulent invoices, inflated expense reports, kickbacks from suppliers, and tax evasion that totaled nearly $500,000. I compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier: bank records, email chains, phone logs, photographs, video evidence, and a complete timeline of Richard's crimes. Then I did something that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I sent it all to the IRS, the State Attorney General's office, and the Better Business Bureau, all from the same IP address that Richard's fraudulent activities had been traced to. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. When investigators looked into the tips they'd received, they would find overwhelming evidence of Richard's crimes, all traced back to his own digital footprint. The offshore account in my name would be discovered not as evidence of my guilt, but as proof of his identity theft. The money I hadn't touched would demonstrate that I'd never benefited from his schemes. And Emma's laptop, which I'd anonymously shipped to the FBI's white-collar crime unit, contained all the evidence needed to prove that this had been a deliberate frame job. The dominoes began falling faster than I'd anticipated. Richard was arrested on a Tuesday morning as he arrived at his office. The local news covered the story with barely contained glee. Local businessmen arrested for fraud, tax evasion. By Wednesday, his company's assets had been frozen. By Friday, the bank had started foreclosure proceedings on the house where my mother and Emma still lived. I watched it all unfold from my dorm room, tracking news stories and police reports with the same detached fascination of a scientist observing an experiment. This was justice, I told myself. This was what happened when you tried to destroy someone's life. But justice, I was learning, was a cold comfort. My mother tried to call me on Saturday. I stared at her name on my phone screen for a long time before answering. Marcus? Her voice was small, broken. Marcus, I need to talk to you. About what, Mom? The words came out harder than I'd intended. About Richard, about what happened. The police, they say he framed you. They say he's been stealing money for years, and he used your information to hide it. Yes. Silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. I'm sorry, she whispered finally. Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have believed you. You should have been my mother, I said quietly, instead of his wife. I hung up. Over the next few days, the calls and messages kept coming. My mother, desperate and devastated. Emma, crying and begging for forgiveness. Old family friends who suddenly remembered my phone number. Everyone wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo the damage that had been done. But the damage wasn't just to me, it was to all of us. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The house was lost to foreclosure. My mother, unable to cope with the shame and financial ruin, had what the doctors politely called a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for 2 months. Emma dropped out of college and moved in with distant relatives, her own future derailed by her father's crimes and her complicity in his schemes. I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford that spring. I walked across the stage alone, with no family in the audience to witness what should have been the proudest moment of my life so far. The diploma felt heavy in my hands, weighted not with accomplishment, but with the knowledge of what I'd sacrificed to earn it. A year later, I'm working for a cybersecurity firm in San Francisco, making more money than Richard ever did legally. I have a nice apartment, a car that actually starts every morning, and colleagues who respect my work. By every measurable standard, I've succeeded beyond what anyone might have expected. But success, I've learned, tastes different when it's seasoned with revenge. My mother sends me letters now, long, rambling apologies filled with regret and desperate pleas for reconciliation. Emma has reached out through social media, trying to explain that she was just a scared teenager who didn't know how to stand up to her father. They both want forgiveness, want to rebuild what was broken, want to pretend that we can somehow go back to being a family. I keep the letters in a drawer in my kitchen, unopened. I've blocked Emma on all social media platforms. Not out of anger anymore. That cold fury burned itself out months ago, but out of something more complex and harder to name. The truth is, I destroyed Richard, not just to clear my name or reclaim my identity, but because I wanted him to feel what I felt in that library. The sudden, devastating realization that the people you trusted most had betrayed you completely. I wanted him to experience the helplessness of watching his world collapse while being powerless to stop it. And I succeeded, perhaps too well, because in destroying Richard, I also destroyed the family I'd been trying to prove myself worthy of. My mother's breakdown wasn't just about losing her husband. It was about realizing that her son had become someone capable of such calculated revenge. Emma's tears weren't just about losing her father. They were about understanding that her stepbrother had orchestrated his downfall with surgical precision. They're not wrong to be afraid of what I became. Sometimes, late at night in my apartment overlooking the San Francisco Bay, I wonder if I could have handled things differently. If I could have simply presented the evidence of Richard's crimes without the elaborate scheme to frame him for framing me. If I could have found a way to clear my name without destroying everyone else's life in the process. But then I remember that text message. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. I remember the casual cruelty of it, the way my mother had discarded me like yesterday's garbage without even the courtesy of a phone call or a face-to-face conversation. And I remember that they didn't just kick me out, they tried to destroy my future, my reputation, and my identity. They weren't content to simply be rid of me. They wanted to ensure that I could never recover, never rebuild, never become anything more than the failure Richard had always claimed I was. So, no, I don't regret what I did to Richard. He deserved everything that happened to him and more. But I do regret what it cost me, because in the end, I got exactly what I said I wanted: justice. Richard was exposed as a fraud and a criminal. My name was cleared. My identity was restored. I proved that I was worthy of respect and success. The only problem is that there's no one left who matters enough to witness it. I have no family to celebrate my achievements with, no one who knew me before this all happened to remind me of who I used to be. I'm successful, vindicated, and completely alone, which might be the most perfect revenge of all, except that it's a revenge I inflicted on myself. My mother's latest letter arrived yesterday. I can see it through the kitchen drawer's glass front, her familiar handwriting on the cream-colored envelope. For the first time in months, I found myself tempted to open it, to read what she has to say, to maybe, just maybe, consider the possibility of forgiveness. But forgiveness, I've learned, requires trust, and trust, once broken as completely as ours was, might be impossible to rebuild. They changed all the locks and told me I didn't have a home anymore. They were right, I don't. But neither do they. And in the end, maybe that's justice enough.